What's good, guys? So in this video I'm going to be breaking down one of my favorite samples, and I actually made this in the month of May 2024. So it's an older sample, but it still holds to this day in my opinion. The main key when it comes to this sample is simplicity and really just sound selection and frequency range. And also another gem with this sample is that I actually used my own voice as one of the main tracks. So I'm going to break this sample down, going over all the plugins and effects that I used, the VSTs, and how I recorded my own voice. So let's get into it. So here's the intro.
Gonna hit the mall, gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops and my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us. Gonna hit the mall, we gon' rack it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So like I said, there's not a lot of tracks in this. There's about 7 in total, but really 4 of them are making up the bulk of this sample. So let's get straight into it. So the first layer that I used came from Sky Keys, and this is like a $20 VST, I think, and super worth it in my opinion. There are some really cool sounds, and I used the My Cassette preset. And all I did was initially just added some RC20 and a really low mix. So I didn't do too much with this. I just kind of increased the width so it sounded wider, and obviously just some of the noise just so you had some of that vinyl crackle. And this track alone is a good example that less is more. You don't need to add a bunch of plugins and effects if it's not necessary. I like the way this sounded, and this was the pattern that I played, which also was super simple. It sounds like this. And then just down an octave. So the pattern is so simple, but it just sounded really good to me. It's just a very devious and eerie sounding preset. So again, I didn't really need to do much. I literally just bounced that out, and I didn't even add any effects, plugins, buses, anything. And before I get to the vocals, I have this percussive loop, and it just sounds like this. And so when I was making this sample, I was playing around with some drum loops that were just underneath, just so I had an idea of what it could sound like. And I think this was the one that I used, and I'm pretty sure I just got this off of Splice. And I just pitched this drum sample up 1 using the sound shifter, just so it matched the key of the project, which was C sharp minor. I normally assume that drum samples, especially on Splice, are in C. This was what it sounded like. And so in context with the sample, I was just using it more as a reference, but then I decided to bounce it out, and then I just added some of the halftime and then just the fab filter EQ, just cutting out pretty much all the highs, all the lows, keeping that kind of like mid-range section, just so it wasn't really interfering with like the low end of the sub bass and also the high end, which the keys are obviously in. So, and the next layer we've got is the synth bass, which I just love the sound of this, and really is just the backbone of the sample. And it's just the clip signs bass preset in Omnisphere. I always forget how great some of these synth bass sounds are in Omnisphere. There's so many really good synth sounds, and I know Omnisphere is obviously like one of the goated VSTs, and it's just really the backbone of a lot of hip-hop production, but I feel like it does get slept on more these days just because there are a lot of newer VSTs like Analog Labs. I wouldn't sleep on some of the banks in here because there's some really good sounds. So as you can tell, obviously with this glide setting on, it just gives it that nice glide, and all I did was added some of the fab filter Saturn, which just gave it a bit of saturation, a bit of compression, and then all I did was just use some of the fab filter EQ and just taking out some of the lows, some of the highs, and yeah, this was a pattern that I played.
See the odds and my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us. Gonna hit the mall, we gon' rack it up. Land a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So So that glide is just doing so much for this bass, and I just love the way it sounded in this sample. Really nice sounding bass. On these buses, I've just got a bit of distortion and just some chorus EQing out the low end, so the chorus is just kind of widening and spreading that high end of the synth bass, and I tend to do that a lot on my synth basses. Now for one of the main textures, and yes, this is my vocal, so
gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops and my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So this really just came from 3 layers that I'd recorded, and they sound like this. So the first layer, which I had pretty much put the same plugins on all 3 layers, just with slight adjustments on the EQ. I added some of the Logic stock compressor here, and I added auto tune, the Antares one, which is probably the go-to auto tune. I'm using the low male setting. It's tuned to C sharp minor, really high retune speeds. So there's not much variation from the key that it's in, so it's very heavily auto tuned. And then just some EQ, cutting out the lows again because I've got the synth bass in this range, and then the highs and just some unwanted frequencies. And then lastly, just adding some of the default portal, which just kind of gives it a little like shimmery effect. But without any of the plugins, this was the vocal take. And bear with me, this is my raw voice.
Gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So with the auto tune and just compression,
gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up.
So that already just sits a lot better. And then with the compression and reverb,
gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple.
Oh yeah, and I should have specified that on the reverb, I have this set to a very small sounding room, so it just sounds a lot more intimate, and I think that just gives it that more kind of almost sinister, kind of dark tone to it, because it's like you're in the same room as that voice. It's not a super like washed out atmospheric sound or vocal, so yeah, I just really like the effect that that gave.
Gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up.
So it's just a very like kind of gravelly, almost like low effort sounding vocal, and that's what I was going for, at least with this layer. And then
gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks.
So that almost just makes it sound like it's, you know, talking through a radio, or I'm talking through a radio or like phone box. And then with the next layer, it's just the same set of lyrics, but all I did was just EQ this slightly differently. So I'm focusing more on the low end here. You can see it's slightly different from the first EQ. And then I'd added some shaper box just so there was some panning going on. And so without any of the plugins, it sounds like this.
Gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up.
And I should specify there is a little bit of effect being played through this bus, which I just have some reverb, but not too much. And with all the plugins, it sounds like this.
Gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up.
So you can see that it's more low end focused. This is really important when you are layering, because you want things to sit in their own place, their own frequency range, and also even in terms of panning, you can see I have slightly panned this. Yeah, that's that layer. And then the next one is just a higher frequency one. So the first one is mids, the second one is the low end, and then this one is high and it's panned opposite. So again, the only difference here should be the EQ. Yeah, you can see I've cut out a lot of the lows and just focused more on the high end. And this one sounds like this.
Gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops.
So it's a lot more thin.
Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us. Gonna hit the mall, we gonna rack it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So you can hear I'm almost like doing more of a whisper in the second half, and I think that was just a really nice kind of sense of variation. But again, you can hear how much thinner this layer is compared to the other ones where they're more bassy and more mid-focused. So yeah, all together.
Gonna hit the mall, we gonna run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Spend a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So I just bounced all 3 of those layers out, and then I used this ARTG mastering plugin. This is from Waves, and I really love this plugin. I don't use it often on instrument tracks. I use it more for the master channel, but you can see here on the spreader, I've made it more mono, so it's not as wide sounding. Again, keeping in mind that the reverb is also quite close sounding. I wanted this vocal to sound very intimate, and it just gives you more of that. It's a bit more of a creepy vibe to it, so I just like that. Boosting some of the highs, and yeah, not doing too much with this plugin. And then I added Little Altar Boy, which is a great plugin for vocals because you can pitch the formant, which doesn't actually, from what I understand, change the pitch itself of the vocal because it still suits the key of this project, but it just makes it sound lower. Just added like a slight bit of reverb here, and then I just added some delay. This is also on the Valhalla Supermassive, just a subtle amount, and the width being very close sounding again. And then adding a bunch of EQ here, just boosting and mostly ducking some of the unwanted frequencies. And yeah, that's the vocal layer. Super simple. So I'm gonna play the next bit, transitioning into the next section, and it sounds like this.
Gonna hit the mall, we gon' rack it up. Been a couple racks, yeah, we gonna run it up. See the ops, yeah, my homie, he gon' run it up. Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So obviously this is a section where it breaks down a lot, and especially keeping in mind that a producer is going to use this sample, there's so much space for something like an 808 or drums to be over this. But all I did was take those same keys and I used the Cymatics Origin plugin, just cutting out a lot of the highs here, so it obviously sounded a lot more muffled sounding, and then just using the EQ to cut out all the lows and just these frequencies that I found to be quite harsh, and then just using some of the stock Logic compressor, compressing it even more so it just sounded very tight and dense. Vocals came back in, same with the percussive loop, and then into the final section.
Then we flee, call the cops, they gonna rat on us.
So this choir actually came from Sky Keys as well, and the preset was called Ancient Choir, and I didn't adjust anything on the preset. All I did was just added a little bit of reverb, again that kind of small room sound, and just a little bit of RC20, just adding some wobble and a little bit of noise, and yeah, not doing too much else on here, which really speaks to the quality of some of these sounds. You know, I really didn't need to do much, and I just took that same pattern, that same layer as before, and duplicated it. And then down an octave. That is such an easy way to get like a B section in your samples, is just to take the same melody you've created and just pitch it down an octave. I just mentioned this in my last video, but another thing you can do a lot of the time is just things down 5 semitones. So generally what is common is going down 5 semitones or going down a full octave. So that tends to work quite a lot of the time, and it definitely did in this sample in my opinion. And the last cool little kind of ear candy in this was a sound that you wouldn't probably expect. And this is where I did add a lot of processing and achieved something really cool in my opinion. This, believe it or not, is the synth bass. So I'm going to take off all the plugins and listen to this. So I literally just chopped a tiny bit from the bass that I had added. I pitched it up a full octave with the sound shifter. I added this Portal preset Ratio Chaser, and I brought the mix down to about 50%, but this is the difference that it made. So it just gave it a lot of these delayed artifacts and just cool sounds. And then I added the RC20 with a much higher mix this time, a lot of noise on this, making the width smaller. You can also see in the EQ, I've really tried to tighten it and focus on that mid-range, just because I still have the actual synth bass playing, which is taking up all that low end. So I don't want the two to clash. And then I also added some reverb using the small dark room preset. So this was obviously, again, a small room sound. And then I added some compression, and this is just the stock Logic compression. And I actually sidechained this to the keys as well, just so it would duck a little bit and not clash, since it was in a similar frequency range. And then just cutting out all the lows, all the highs with the EQ, and then adding some of the RVox to compress it, and adding even more compression. So this is like the third compressor I added. Again, I made this like a year ago, so maybe my mixing approach would have been a bit different this time around, but hey, I got the sound I was going for. And I just cut out the lows here and added some shaper box, which was just panning it basically, because, you know, the effect is very much like ear candy that's just kind of going all over the place. The panning just made sense. And then just some multi-band compression, which didn't really do too much here, just ducked some of the range where like the percussive elements are and some of the choir. So yeah, then the percussion loop comes back in, and all I did was take that choir and moved it down to the same layer that I had with the keys before on the B section. So just where a lot of those highs and lows are cut, it just made sense to do the same on this one. Just, I love that vinyl-y like crackle texture it has, and yeah, I just kept it as is for the outro. So I really like the simplicity of this one, and even just looking back on projects like this for myself is quite eye-opening, because this is still genuinely one of my favorite samples. And I think some of that is maybe just even having the personal touch of using my own vocals, which I really want to get back into the swing of doing, because it can really take your samples to a whole different level using your own voice, because nobody else sounds like you. And I mean, I can't sing, but with plugins like Auto-Tune, you'd be really surprised how amazing you can get the vocals to sound in your tracks. And just even in terms of atmospheres and ear candy, you know, you don't necessarily even want to be at the forefront of your sample if you're sending this out to producers to get artists onto. Usually they're just going to be background vocals. So experiment with recording your own vocals, and if you have Auto-Tune or some kind of auto-tuner, it can obviously do wonders for you. But yeah, that was my sample, Run It Up, and it's from my sample pack called Letters, and I'll link it in the description if you do want to purchase it. You can check out my store as well, blueinfinity.store. And so just to reiterate, that simplicity is super important in samples. I think in just producing in general, it's really hard not to want to just add layer after layer. But if you already have that sound and emotion and feeling from the sample already, just ask yourself, is it necessary? Is it really better that I add more layers here? Or is this enough? Considering that you're also going to probably have a producer or yourself add drums to it and then try and get an artist on it as well. It just serves as a good reminder that sometimes less is more. And I honestly think that's one of the biggest challenges for a lot of us producers. But let me know what you think, and I really enjoy making these sample breakdowns. I have so many samples to go over and explain different production techniques that I've used. A lot of them are completely different sounding from each other, so plenty more to come. And if you want to see any kind of tutorials or anything, just let me know in the comments below. You can also check out my Instagram, which is just blueinfinity, 2 underscores at the end. And yeah, until then, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.